Hello everyone, welcome along to the Week 1 recap from the whole 9 yards. Recapping GMAN Division 9 here in REBBL. And it's been a very good first week in Division 9, I have to say. Lots of touchdowns, a few very interesting results, and our fair share of deaths as well. Which is always a good thing, isn't it, when it comes to Blood Bowl. So yeah, this is Haringzod, and probably over the next half an hour, 40 minutes or so, we'll just run over what happened in the first week. Obviously, we'll look over all the results, we'll hand out the Performance of the Week award very shortly. And then just a quick update on a few key injuries for Week 2, and some key development on certain players as well. We're not going to go over every team, but we're just going to highlight some of the most important level ups and such things. And finally, we'll finish off with a look at the Week 2 fixtures. So, we'll get straight into the results, and the Performance of the Week, fairly easy to hand out in Week 1, because I've just given it to the team who are top of the league, and that is Sabertooth Vag 3.0, coached by MB Carmack. And they had a very good first week, in which they won 2-0 against the Humans of Hack Slash and Mutilate. It was a fairly low it wasn't a particularly bloody match, you have to say. Here it is now. But a 2-0 result, and a good MVP as well for MB Carmack, with the catcher scoring a touchdown and helping himself to that MVP, meaning that the rookie catcher levels up. Had a check, he did roll guard, so that's now 2 guard catchers that we have on this team. Similarly for Jonah there, Hack Slash and Mutilate. We will come back to Arthur in a bit, because he's actually one of the players that we're going to highlight a little bit later in the show for you. But a solid 2-0 result. That they were the only team, were Sabertooth Vag, to win by more than 1 touchdown, which has sent them straight to the top of the table, which is exactly where they want to be. Keeps them, obviously, it's very early days in the season, you have to say. But that's obviously there's a mighty blow Ogre knocking around. They've come out of the game without anything in the way of permanent damage. Just the 1 MNG on a rookie lineman, which Wood Elves can certainly live with. The Humans taken the 1 injury themselves, which was to the catcher you can see there, Arthur. But it's not all bad news for Jonah, because he did manage to level 3 players. The Ogre being one of them. The Ogre helped himself to a casualty and has leveled up to take Juggernaut, which is an interesting choice. Suggesting we might be using that thing to blitz a fair bit. And we also leveled up a lineman too, who picked up block. So that's the Performance of the Week. The first of them going to Sabertooth Vag 3.0. And we can now move on. We've got another fancy graphic coming up, folks, for the results from Week 1. So here they are. You can see we begin with a 2-1 win for the Bloody Mary Queens against the Quiguanas. Chosen of Papanurgle 1, Shock and Gore 1. As we saw, Sabertooth Vag 3.0 with a 2-0 win over Hack Slash and Mutilate the Humans. Sci-Fi Saurai going down 2-1 against the Big Cups. And then a couple of high-scoring draws. So the Boondock Skinks 2, Hubat 2, and the Watch 2, Sneaky Blinders 2 as well. And finally, the highest-scoring game of them all, with Erwin Does Requiem winning 3-2 against the Dark Elves at an Elfos. So a very good result for Erwin, that puts him in amongst those teams that have won their first game, which in total there were 4 of them. The High Elves, the Wood Elves, the Dwarfs, and the Undead getting off to winning starts. So what we'll do is now we'll take a quick glance over each of the games individually in the client. So we're doing this alphabetically. And the reason we're doing it with the graphics as well is just as you get further through the season, you can end up with games either being played early or late, and we're just keen to avoid spoilers for all that sort of thing. So here's the 2-1 win for the Bloody Mary Queens against Quiguanas. Again, not a massively bloody game, but a decent MVP on the catcher there. He now just needs a little vanity pass somewhere to get himself a level. Does Mel Deary in the 3rd. Just a 1 level for Soulforged and his High Elf team. But he did manage to get a little bit of SPP knocking around the place. A couple of completed passes from the thrower. And a completion from the Agi 5 lineman with guard who we saw. and indeed the lineman who levelled, who was called Thargolian Kavavanlahoon. Don't ask me to say that every week. He rolled kick, so the High Elves now in possession of a kicker, which is very useful for them going forward. Disappointing start of the season for Quiguanas, but again, they did help themselves to 3 level ups. 2 of them were on skinks, so Pascal rolled sure feet, and Rango, importantly, rolled sure hands. So Quiguanas now boasting a sure hand skink. And one of the Saurus with block leveled as well, Mr. Vile, helping himself to a double. So he is now Blodge, meaning that this team now have 2 Blodge Saurus. So that's not too bad. You can maybe afford to lose the first game of the season if you're going to pick up development like that. Now, this second game, the Chosen of Papanergal versus Shock and Gore. If you were around watching my stream on Sunday, you might have actually caught this game live. The match between Lava Jackal and Gruff. Now, it was a really interesting game. And I think the way that it was myself and the Richest T casting it, and the way I described it at the end was it was a game that finished in a 1-1 draw that absolutely, under no circumstances, should have ended as a draw. Because both coaches had it in them to win this, and both coaches will kind of be disappointed they didn't. The story of the game, though, comes from Gruff inducing 2 bribes, and he knows I'm going to mention this, failing to foul anything pretty much for the entire game, and to the extent of leaving his dirty player on the bench for the second half, which had both me and the Richest T just howling at what on earth he was thinking. I think the analogy we came up with was it was kind of like hiring Griff Oberwald and sticking him on the bench. So that's the thing with the inducement system. It's there to help you out if you're down TV. And it was a tough matchup for him, this, against the Nurgle, especially with the Claw Mighty Blow Nurgle Warrior running around. But to be fair, the Nurgle Warrior didn't actually do all that much damage. It was a really interesting game. Gruff's defense was solid in the first half until he failed 1 in 9 dodge from a ghoul that very much collapsed his defensive drive and just left him trying to hang on to players. In the second half, was very patient, was 1-0 down, and then suddenly got a couple of removals in one turn, and just the drive opened up for him. Ended up getting a 1-1, but had we been a little bit more aggressive with the bribes, then I think Gruff might be feeling that he could have won the game if he got a few key removals there. And similarly, Lava Jackal, I thought, was a little bit passive defensively in the second half when Gruff was taking his time making his mind up as to which way he wanted to go. It felt to me like Lava Jackal could really have forced the issue and played a little bit aggressively on defence to maybe force that turnover of possession and make sure he won the game. But in the end, it was a 1-1 draw, and there was a level up for this Nurgle Warrior here, Melkor the Magnificent. He has picked up Guard, which is, of course, very good news for this Nurgle team. I was saying in the pre-cap that the one thing they need is a bit of Guard, and it showed in that game as well against Shock and Gore. At times, a little tricky to get those hits on the Strength 5 mummies with that lack of Guard in play. So decent positioning from Gruff there. But overall, I don't think either coach would be too disappointed with the results. Certainly, Shock and Gore will be happy to get out of the game with just the 1 armor bust on a block zombie. No permanent damage there, which is good news for them. Okay, so the next game we've already talked about, Sabertooth Vag winning 2-0 against Hack, Slash and Mutilate, a result that leaves the Wood Elves at the top of the table. And unfortunately for Jonah, the humans at the bottom of the table. So we'll move on to the 4th game you can see on the list there. And that is the Sci-Fi Sauri taking a 1-2 defeat at home to the Big Cups, the Dwarf team that I did back to do quite well at the start of the season. And managing to take down the higher strength Lizard Man team there, 2-1. We'll bring the game up for you now. Again, it was very low in terms of armor breaks, so only 7 and 9 each way. We didn't have much in the way of permanent damage on either team. Couple of badly hurt skinks, as you'd expect from a game against Dwarfs. The Dwarfs taken no casualties at all in the game, which was good news for them. Managed to get 2 touchdowns on the runner, which was 6 SPP for him. That MVP on the blocker will go a long way. He just needs 1 random casualty now to pick up Guard, or maybe Mighty Blow. I'd like to see a little bit more Mighty Blow on this Dwarf team. The Troll Slayer only picking up the 1 casualty That's the piling on Mighty Blow Troll Slayer. But nonetheless, it was a good result for Juvasak there. And it leaves him up amongst the 4 teams who have won their opening game. But very little to talk about in the way of development, because neither coach managed to level any players at all. So not a great week for Cthulhu Collector, but he did manage to get... Oh, he did manage to get one casualty. It must have been Apothecaries. So there was a Saurus who picked up a Kaz to go to 14 out of 16 SPP. You'll see it in the statistics here. In fact, in the SPP, James Blish, they're getting 2. And did inflict the injury, but it must have been APO'd by Juvasak, that one, which is why it doesn't show up in the Rebel.net scorecard that I'm looking at in the background. So moving on from that result, the next one is one of the 3 remaining high-scoring games. And the Boondock Skinks picking up a 2-all draw against Hubat, the Vampire team. Be interesting to see how the Vampires get on. You never really know with Vamps, do you? But this is, of course, the Lizardman team that's a little bit more bloaty on the Skink front as opposed to the Saurus front. Did manage 1 level in the game, and it's one of the 3 I'm going to highlight, so we'll come back to that one later in the show. The Vampires, unfortunately, not leveling anything in the game, but still getting some decent SPP. 2 touchdowns for Count Vladislav, the Blood Dragon, who was the Bloodstep Vamp there. And a couple of passes coming from the Agi 6, as you might expect. But not taking, just the 1 badly hurt for a Thrall. And we'll come back to one of the other players, because there is a stat bust on one of the Vampires, which we're going to look at very shortly. But overall, a 2-all draw, probably fair. Again, very low in terms of armor breaks, not much going on there. The division, certainly in the first week, seems to be lacking that little bit of killing power to really see some of these high armor break matches stacking up. Okay, match 6 is, of course, and I forgot to take the result screen away there. So there is confirmation of that 2-2 draw between the Boondock Skinks and Hubat. But like I say, 9 and 6, very little to see in terms of that. So game 6 was the Watch 2, Sneaky Blinders 2. So that's the Orcs drawing 2-all against Aromasin's Underworld. So you've got to say good result for Aromasin. We talked in the pre-cap about how last season he only managed 1 draw and 12 defeats over the course of the whole season. So picking up a draw already means he's already matched his point total for season 9 after the opening week of games. For both teams, though, the 2-all draw is not the end of the world, because we managed to get some good development. The Orcs managing to level 3 players. Unfortunately for the Underworld, they didn't manage to level any, but for the Orcs, certainly, who we highlighted at the start of the season as potentially being a little bit lacking on that front, managing to level 1 Black Orc and 2 of their Blitzers, and, as a bonus, picking up the Player of the Week award. So Angwer von Uberwald from the Watch, he picked up 7 SPP in this game, and that doesn't include the MVP. So for the Player of the Week award, it's the player who gets the most SPP minus any MVPs that might be picked up. So Angwer von Uberwald picks up that award for week 1. We can see him here, the Blitzer. He did level at the same time. So to add to his mighty blow, he now has Tackle, which is good news for dealing with elves and other such slippery things. So 1 touchdown and 2 casualties there for the Blitzer, making up his 7, and that was more than anybody else managed to get over the course of the first week. Also, the plus movement Blitzer, Nobby Nobs, leveled up, and he picked up Mighty Blow. And that Black Orc that leveled up we saw from the MVP before, he picked up Block. So a little bit of way to go before he gets himself to possibly Guard or Mighty Blow. But nonetheless, better to have Block than not to have Block, eh? Okay, so the final result of the week is certainly the highest scoring one. And I've got to say, Erwindor probably unlucky to miss out on the Performance of the Week award here, with this 3-2 win over the Dark Elves. So Erwindor's Requiem, not only did they pick up the most touchdowns of any team, but they also picked up the most armor breaks of any team, certainly that I can see. 14 of them, compared to the Dark Elves 4. A great MVP as well for Lou Costello. Look at this, 50 out of 51 now. That's a Blodge Guard mummy that is now 1 1 SPP away from a level up, and something like break tackle or stand firm. Break tackle or stand firm, I can see arguments both sides on that thing. But a 3-2 result, plenty of SPP. Also managing to level up Paul Therian, who, if you watch the precap show, you'll know is the strength for white. He now has Mighty Blow as well. So an excellent week for Owen Dawn. That again puts him amongst the teams who have 1 win out of 1. It's very early days, isn't it, to be analysing anything like that. A rough week for Aaron Elfos, who were unfortunate enough to take 2 deaths. One of them was a loner, which is lucky enough. But they did lose a rookie lineman too in this game, very possibly at the hands of Lou Costello, who was in all sorts of good form, picking up 9 SPP in that game, 2 casualties and the MVP for the Mummy there. And yeah, that wraps up your results and the performance of the week and the player of the week, which means it's time to move on to the injury report. So this is one of the features of the recap this season. So what I'm going to do is highlight 3 players each week who've taken a bit of a knock, and the apothecaries weren't necessarily able to put them back together. And that means they'll be missing for the next week. So if you're up against these guys in the next week, you're going to be you're going to be missing out on facing them, certainly. And it might just do you a little bit of a favour. So the first one of those on the injury report is Count Vorrigan Rasputin here, the RG5 Blodge Vamp, who has, unfortunately for him, taken a movement bust. Now, movement busts, very, very painful on vampire teams. They're not the quickest team in the game anyway, at movement 6 on the Vamps and indeed the Thralls. So they struggle to get around the field, and now all of a sudden that Blodge Agi5 Vampire, he's kind of the guy you want to be doing all of the ball retrieval and such plays like that, and suddenly with movement 5 that becomes a lot more difficult. So decisions to be made for Paolo B as to what to do with that thing. For the time being, I imagine he'll keep it around. He does have an Agi 6 Vampire on the team though, so may decide that old Count Vorrigan Rasputin here is a little bit too much on the bloaty side to keep around. So regardless, he won't be around in week 2. Next up on the injury report, and it's an unfortunate one really. We talked about the death count on the Dark Elves. Well, there was equal problems for Chosen of Papanergal, who also, we can't even highlight this player. Poor old Dangerous, well, I'll tell you what, we can actually highlight this player, because poor old Dangerous Dave has found himself transferred, because he was killed by Shock and Gore and is now a zombie, Dangerous Dave II. So, of course, he was the dirty player for Lava Jackal. Died fairly early on in the game, in the first half, to a block from, I think it was one of the mummies. I'll just get confirmation from that in the bot. Yeah, it was either one of the mummies or one of the zombies. There was a casualty for Boris as well, one of the block zombies. But Dangerous Dave is no longer a rotter and is instead a zombie. His suffering goes on, unfortunately for him. But hey, he's still got regen, and what is dead may never die, eh? Right, the third player on the injury report is an elf. And unfortunately, it's a decent elf, which is why we're highlighting him. Certainly a player that will be very important to Soulforged as he tries to retrieve the ball from his opponent. And that is Menononian Teleneth here. The guard lineman is unfortunately MNG for week 2. So that is one of 2 guard players on this elf team. But one of them is a catcher who has... it's a lineman, who has Agi 5 and Dodge. So not necessarily going diving straight into where it hurts is the other guard player. But he's going to have to next week because, unfortunately, Menononian Teleneth has got himself hurt doing exactly that sort of thing. And he will be missing from the Bloody Mary Queen's week 2 fixture. Okay, so moving on from the injury report, we now have the development report. And this runs along a very similar line. We're going to highlight 3 players who... Obviously, there's been plenty of level ups this week, but we're going to highlight what I feel are 3 of the most important, or certainly the most interesting players to have leveled up. And before we finish quite with the injury report, worth pointing out that the death count for the week is 4, which is pretty good going for week 1 in a division, certainly in a division of teams which aren't necessarily the bashiest in REBBL. So well done, everyone. Keep it up. We want to see more of that. So the first player we're going to highlight, and I think I picked out this thing in the pre-cap, plays for the Boondock Skinks. Does Noah Il Deuce. And the Croxigo has managed to level and has, exactly as predicted, picked up stand firm. So that is now a block guard stand firm Croxigo, which is it's almost a perfect Croxigo, really. The Saurus on this team are lacking still in their development. So having a Croxigo like this who can be a sort of focal point of the team is really, really useful for Moondingo. He managed to get 1 casualty and then picked up the MVP. But he would have leveled without the MVP anyway. He was only 1 casualty short. So now that's a block guard stand firm Croxigo, which is a nightmare for anyone trying to move said block guard stand firm Croxigo out of the way. And that's why you pick stand firm on a Croxigo. Okay, so the second player that we're going to highlight actually plays for Aaron Elfos, the Dark Elf team, who did take a Death 2 alignment and a loner in the first week, but did manage to level their Witch Elf, Resela, who we see here. And Resela has done very good work and rolled a double to pick up Mighty Blow. Now, of course, lacking other skills to go with the Mighty Blow, but it's a good starting point when you get that double. And it certainly means we can start focusing on developing this witch into a killer. She'll probably ramp up, as long as she stays alive, she'll probably start ramping up the SPP quite quickly, because you would imagine she's going to get priority on blitzing now, as long as she doesn't end up frenzy trapping herself. But Mighty Blow Witch Elves, always very scary. And it gives this Dark Elf team a little bit of killing power that it didn't previously have. No other Mighty Blow players on the team. So it's good news for Aaron Alphos. And as I say, you'd expect to see this get itself up to 16 SPP. Possibly feed it a touchdown to help it along the way as well, because you can get that thing blocked. It's going to be much safer making those blitzes. And it's very, very useful for taking out opposition players, which helps when you're elves too, so you don't end up too outnumbered and unable to save the game. All right, the final player that we're going to talk about, and I alluded to it before ever so slightly. He plays for Hack, Slash and Mutilate, who are unfortunately bottom of the table after that 2-0 defeat. But he got the MVP, and then he went and did what everyone else on this team has done, and Arthur rolled an agility up. So that is now the 4th Agi 4 player on this human team. We've got 2 Agi 4 throwers and 2 Agi 4 catchers. Now this one is armor value 7 as well. Honestly, I'm thinking, just play elves. If you're so keen to have so much Agi 4 and armor value 7, maybe just play elves. But hey, we're going to do it with ogres on the team as well. So Arthur there picking up an agility up. And that'll be very useful if the humans are wanting to play the passing game, because it just makes, especially with that catch skill, and of course the pass skill on the throwers, makes your life so much easier. Only failing on that 1 in 36, assuming you're not in any tackle zones, which you'd like to think you're not if you're doing things right. Okay, so that wraps up the development report for week 1. So what we will do is we'll just back out of here and we'll take a quick look at the leaderboard. Very early days, of course, but you can see Sabretooth Vag at the top of the table there. MB Carmack's 1,360 TV Wood Elf team. Alongside him, Erwinder's Requiem, the Big Cups, and the Bloody Mary Queens, all with 1 win out of 1. Then, of course, after them come all the teams who drew. Boondock Skinks, Hubat, The Watch, Sticky Blinders, Shock and Gore, and Chosen of Papa Nurgle. The bottom 2 down there by the virtue of the fact that they drew 1-1 as opposed to 2-2, which I believe is how the Blood Bowl client splits ties, but I mean, who knows really. And then at the bottom, unfortunately, it's the 4 teams who lost. So we've got Machu, Cthulhu Collector, Extrem, and not to be forgotten, Jonah there on the second page, because for some reason we only have 13 spots for teams, which is ridiculous. All right, so moving on to week 2, we can take a look at the fixture list now. So the week 2 fixtures are as follows. We've got Chosen of Papanergal taking on Hubat. Now you can see, if you're wondering what those coloured dots are, you might be able to work it out having just looked at the league table. But that is essentially their result from the previous week. So Chosen of Papanergal and Hubat both drew, so they get a yellow dot under the table. You can see, of course, 9th versus 5th in the table. And as the season goes on, what this screen is going to do is show you the 3 previous results of each team. So we can kind of check who's in good form, maybe predict who might be favoured to win that one. Certainly in terms of this first game, I think you have to say that Chosen of Papanergal are going to be favourites to win that. They've got a lot of Mighty Blow. They've picked up that guard, and they're up against Thralls, who aren't going to stick around on the field too long. Not only are they going to take Mighty Blow hits from Nurgle Warriors on what will be natural 2 dice, but the Vampires are probably going to eat some of them off the field as well. So very difficult fixture this for Hubat, and if I had to pick a winner, would probably plump for Lava Jackal here. Next up is Hackslash and Mutilate taking on Aaron Elfos. So 2 teams who lost their opening game. And you have to say, we'll be looking to avoid defeat again in week 2. Both coaches, though, getting some decent development. Those human linemen will be slightly concerned to see the Mighty Blow level up on the Witch Elf. And we'll see whether Matthew can sort of take proper advantage of that. And position it well and make sure you can protect it too, because it's going to be a high value target, is the Witch Elf. If you remove that, then you get rid of most of the killing power, and by most of the killing power, I don't mean all of the killing power, but certainly the majority of where you'd expect blitzes to come from, and then you're just relying on natural armor breaks at that point. The humans themselves at 1690 TV, so we'll be giving up a little bit of inducement money here. They don't have any tackle on the team, which could be a concern for them. They do have 1 Mighty Blow Blitzer and, of course, the Ogre in their pocket, but the Mighty Blow Blitzer has kick, as we alluded to at the start of the season. The Dark Elves will be getting... They won't quite have enough for a Wizard as it stands. They've got 120k coming to them, and 20k in the bank as well. They do seem to have an assassin on the team. I don't know if they had that last week, but Rayo Paciente. I'll just quickly take away the fixture list there, and you can see that they've now got an assassin on the roster. Not sure if that was there in the pre-cap. Maybe I glazed over that. But you never know. Stab might do its work. But there is 1 tackle blitzer on this team, which will be very useful for dealing with those catchers, of course, the RG4 ones, who don't have block en masse. So it's going to be a big week for Rinrion, who's got leap as well if he wants to go particularly rowdy. Okay, so then we have the league leaders on, or by virtue of touchdown difference. Sabertooth Vag 3.0 taking on Shock and Gore. 1360 Wood Elves taking on the 1400 Undead team. So the two of the lowest team value teams in the league going head to head. So that's going to give the Wood Elves enough for a Bloodwiser Babe at best if they want to spend 10k of their own cash. And in fact, hang on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. No, it won't, because they're going to pick up a loner. So it'll actually be the Undead who get some inducements here. They have 120k in the bank, so it'll be interesting to see what Gruff does with that. And indeed, if he chooses to utilise any inducements that he might pick up this week. So, of course, we've got 2 block mummies, which is going to be a nightmare for any Wood Elf linemen who are in the vicinity. And what it does mean is that, sure, we have that Mighty Blow White, who I imagine Gruff will be looking to level in this game up against armor value 7, but wouldn't be surprised to see blitzers from the mummies as well. Certainly when we have block, if you're up against linemen that don't have dodge. The block mummy that doesn't have guard is only 3 SPP away from a level. And the block mummy that does have guard is only 4 SPP away from a level. So a chance to maybe really develop his team here for Gruff, even if he doesn't quite get the result. But his white does have tackle. He'll have to keep that thing protected. Overall, might still plump for the Wood Elf victory here, just because of the impressive result against the humans opening week. And it could be a good season for them. Game 4 is Sci-Fi Saurai taking on the Bloody Mary Queens, the Lizard Men who lost in week 1, taking on the High Elves who won. And Soulforge will be looking to make it 2 wins out of 2 against Cthulhu Collector. If you can, of course, Always want to see your opponents losing, generally, the week before they play you, because that means that things maybe aren't necessarily going well. He is out his guard lineman, which might make it difficult to get blocks in against Saurus. I think you're likely to see the Elves not throwing many blocks at all in this game. And just trying to keep the Saurus at arm's length. But of course, they're not slow, our Saurus. So forwards will have to be careful and just make sure that he's only giving up hits on the less valuable members of the team. There is a Mighty Blow Tacklesaurus in play for the Sci-Fi Sauri. So Robert A. Heinlein has got a big week ahead of him trying to take out those High Elves. And the Skinks are... None of them have blocks, so they're not massively protected against the High Elf blitzers. But that's kind of the Saurus's job. And interestingly, no tackle or indeed strip ball on the High Elf team. So that would normally be a big threat to Skinks. Not quite there this week, but I think overall, still going to plump for a Bloody Mary Queen's victory here to take them out of 2 wins. The Elves in this division looking like they could be on for pretty decent seasons. Okay, so the next game is Sneaky Blinders taking on the Boondock Skinks. Both teams drew 2-2 in the opening week, and very difficult to split them, really. The Lizards are at 1650 TV. Sneaky Blinders at 1260, so actually a lot of inducement cash coming the way of the Underworld, as you might expect, with them being the lowest team value team in the division. So it'll depend what they spend that money on. Could well pick up something like a Wizard to try and knock the ball free from those pesky Skinks. But remember that there is a Claw Mighty Blow Blitzer on this team. And a Guard Warpstone Troll. So the Saurus could be fearing that Claw Mighty Blow a little bit. Moondingo will need to be careful to make sure his Saurus are well protected. And he doesn't want to lose too many of them before week 3. But overall, you never really know with the Underworld. And I think just based on Romerson's result, it'd be lovely to see him get what would be his first REBBL win in a season and a bit. But if I had to pick a winner, would probably just about plump for the Lizards here. Okay, so the 6th game is the Watch taking on the Big Cups. And the Watch, having helped themselves to a bunch of levels, are in pretty good shape going into this one. The Dwarfs did get a win, and will also be getting around about 70k in inducements for this one. But to be honest, even though they have 120k in the bank, not a great matchup for Dwarfs. Orcs, generally speaking, are just... once those Black Orcs start tying down all your Longbeards one-on-one, it's the equivalent of losing a player unless you're willing to throw dice uphill. So, despite the fact that Juvasak won the opening week, if I had to pick a winner of this game, I might plump for the Orcs and Alzir's team. Realistically, Orcs versus Dwarfs at this sort of TV, I think a 1-1 draw is fairly likely, but I've been wrong in the past, and I will be wrong again in the future, so you never know. Final game is Erwinder's Requiem taking on the Quiguanas. So Erwindor, fresh off the back of that 3-2 win in the opening week, will be looking to make it 2 wins out of 2. And he's been around REBBL for a long time, Erwindor, but never really challenged at the top of any of the divisions he's been in. So I've got to say, it would be great to see him have a really strong season here in Division 9. His team is 1690 team value, which actually makes it the highest team value team in the division. But luckily for him, he's taken on the second highest team value team in the division, with the exception of the Humans, who I've overlooked there. But Quiguanas are at 1660 TV and only have 20k in the bank. So if they want to spend their entire bank, they can get 1 Bloodweiser Bay. But other than that, this is just going to be as you are against as you are. Undead versus Lizards. Looking at the two teams, we've got a 14-man roster. I think Erwinder's probably going to have to play quite strongly on the fouling game here. It'll be interesting to see how the Quiguanas cope with the zombies just tying up the Saurus. I think if Erwinder's able to get zombies just in one-on-one lockdowns with Saurus and the armor doesn't break, then he'll be in a good spot to pick apart some of the Skinks or maybe turn over possession of the ball. But if the zombies do find themselves off the side of the field with KOs or whatever, then I actually think Extreme might be in a good position to win this one. Very difficult to call, and I might sit on the fence and say draw. But if I'm going to back a winner, you know what? I'll back the Lizards to win this one this week. Okay, and that wraps it up for week 2, and indeed wraps it up for week 1 of the what's the show called? The Whole 9 Yards. Completely forgotten name of the show there. So yeah, a relatively quiet opening week in terms of deaths. We haven't seen too many important players die, but what we have seen is some interesting level ups and some good results, especially for the elf teams. The elves have started off very well, with the unfortunate exception of the dark elves of Aaron Elfos. And we will be back in around a week's time to bring you the second round of results, and there'll be more graphics, and I've got more plans to add to this as the season goes on. What I wouldn't mind is some feedback. So if you guys are sort of enjoying the way I'm doing this, let me know. If you're not and you prefer me to just look at all the teams and ramble on that way, then we'll see what we can do. But I'm just trying to spice this up a bit. I think if we just end up looking through all the teams and saying, oh, well, that player's leveled and oh, that player's leveled, can get a little bit dry. So just trying to keep things interesting like this. But yeah, let me know what you think, and we will see you in a week's time.